Well, there, and welcome back to Dogwood Hall. Another sunny, beautiful fall day. It's still a little warm, probably a little too warm for this cardigan sweater, but I wanted to try and come back outside and make the intro to this video. What I'm going to do here is something a little different. I know a lot of my recent videos have been on the longer side and potentially a little drier as I talk about the kind of theoretical and philosophical rationale for why I do things the way I do them when I'm preparing for tabletop role-playing games or preparing materials for use with tabletop role-playing games. And what made me think of this is I was watching Grumpy Old Slan's channel, and I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, but you should definitely go over there and check his channel out, give him a subscription, and like a few videos while you're there, because he does a great job of, like, so reading through old pulp magazines like Weird Tales. He also reads through old game magazines and does streams where you can play the game along with him. And he also, at different times, has read through the spell descriptions of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons first edition books like Unearthed Arcana. So that's also kind of useful if you're not accustomed to the types of magic or spellcasting system from AD&D 1E. And so today, of course, since I'm going to read a Japanese folktale, I wanted to also tie it in with a game, in this case Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1E, which is one of the games that I play the most or prepare for the most, and the Oriental Adventures text, because when we're talking about sparrows, I thought we might go back and look at the hengeyokai, which is one of the races in Oriental Adventures, and in particular, we'll look at it again at the end, the sparrow hengeyokai. And this might be something then that you remember, that these stories don't have to be the sources for entire campaigns or even single adventures. They can be rumors, tall tales, legends, folklore that's overheard by characters in game, or they can be things that they find in a library, or if they find an old book at the bottom of a wizard's chest, it might be old stories that provide clues to the locations of a specific magic item or an ingredient that they needed for a spell. So it doesn't necessarily have to be writ large. It can be a short story that produces a little hint or clue towards a single part, even a minor part of what's going on within the larger milieu of the adventure. So what we'll do is I'll first read this 1885 version of the Tongue-Cut Sparrow, and then afterwards we'll come back real briefly and just kind of look through the Oriental Adventures book and talk a little bit about the Sparrow hengeyokai. All right, so on to the read. The Tongue-Cut Sparrow. It is said that once upon a time a cross old woman laid some starch in a basin, intending to put it in the clothes in her washtub. But a sparrow that a neighbor woman kept as a pet ate it up. Seeing this, the cross old woman seized the sparrow, and saying, "You hateful thing, cut its tongue and let it go." When the neighbor woman heard that her pet sparrow had got its tongue cut for its offense, she was greatly grieved, and set out with her husband over mountains and plains to find where it had gone, crying, "Where does the tongue-cut sparrow stay? Where does the tongue-cut sparrow stay?" At last they found its home. When the sparrow saw its old master and mistress had come to see it, it rejoiced, and brought them into its house, and thanked them for their kindness in old times, and spread a table for them, and loaded it with sake and fish till there was no more room, and made its wife and children and grandchildren all serve the table. At last, throwing away its drinking cup, it danced a jig called the Sparrow's Dance. Thus they spent the day. When it began to grow dark, and they began to talk of going home, the sparrow brought out 2 wicker baskets, and said, "Will you take the heavy one, or shall I give you the light one?" The old people replied, "We are old, so give us the light one. It will be easier to carry it." The sparrow then gave them the light basket, and they returned with it to their home. "Let us open and see what is in it," they said. And when they had opened it and looked, They found gold and silver and jewels and rolls of silk. They never expected anything like this. The more they took out, the more they found inside. The supply was inexhaustible, so that house at once became rich and prosperous. When the cross old woman who had cut the sparrow's tongue saw this, she was filled with envy, and went and asked her neighbor where the sparrow lived, and all about the way. "I will go too," she said, and at once set out on her search. Again, the sparrow brought out 2 wicker baskets, and asked, as before, "Will you take the heavy one, or shall I give you the light one?" Thinking the treasure would be great, in proportion to the weight of the basket, the old woman replied, "Let me have the heavy one." Receiving this, she started home with it on her back, the sparrows laughing at her as she went. It was as heavy as stone and hard to carry, but at last she got back with it to her house. Then, when she took off the lid and looked in, a whole troop of frightful devils came bouncing out from inside, and at once tore the old woman to pieces. Clearly, like so many folk tales, this story has a bit of a moral to it, and it's a cautionary tale about the perils of greed and envy and the importance of kindness and loyalty. And of course, because the characters are anthropomorphic sparrows, that is really what made me think of then the hengeyokai from Adventures in Dragons 1E Oriental Adventures. So we just want to talk a little bit about that particular race. And what we can see is the sparrows are able to have any good alignment. They have movement of, when they're in sparrow form, 3 units on the ground, so 30 feet underground, 30 yards above ground. They also have the ability then to fly, which would be 150 yards in the wilderness above ground, and also 150 feet in underground conditions. And they also have a modifier to +2 to their charisma and -2 to their comeliness. Now, of course, probably most people are no longer considering the use of comeliness if they're playing kind of old school versions of AD&D 1E, or even playing from the original books themselves. It wasn't a very popular stat, and it should be considered optional. There are other games like Dragon Quest, for example, that use physical beauty as an optional stat. It wasn't a mandatory stat in that game at any point. So some other things just real quick about the hengeyokai. They can be any of the classes in the book. Well, they can be shukenja, kensai, bushi, or wujen. So you might think of that as the Shukenja is like a priest class, and the Wujen is like a magic user class. Bushi, of course, would be a standard kind of fighter. Kensai, you probably wouldn't want to use without some careful consideration. It was always kind of considered an overpowered class. Because sparrows are among the are permitted to have any good alignment, there's also a section in here that talks about hengeyokai of good alignment can become protectors of a village. As a general rule, the hengeyokai do not care to spend time around human communities, so that's a deviation from the norm for the good aligned ones. They generally don't have a lot of interest in accumulating power or land and that sort of thing. So they would really be in it just as a protector and defender of a community, and probably for some good reason, like they'd had a positive experience, such as the woman who had originally kept the sparrow in this story, and certainly not like the woman who had cut the tongue of the sparrow out of spite simply for eating the starch that she'd used in her wash tub. So I think that's probably all we need to talk about in terms of the hengeyokai themselves. I hope you enjoyed the reading of the story. Hopefully, I've managed to keep this short enough and sweet enough to make it interesting for everyone. If it turns out to be a popular idea, then I think what I'll do in the future is maybe do some short stories or break some longer stories up into shorter videos. On the whole, I think I'm going to call this series Appendix N plus, and I'll try to give each one a story number and a part number. So this would be like story one, part one, and that would be the only part. So it would be I'll label the series in order as like Appendix N plus S01P01 for story one, part one. And I think the next story I'll do, if it turns out to be popular, will be a story about bards from sub-Saharan West Africa, from the Soninke people, called Gasir's Lute. And that is one that I will probably break up into 5 or 6 parts, maybe even up to 8. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I hope this is something that you'll enjoy and come back to in the future. Thank you very much.